The power to transform into another creature or being is not unheard of in the world of Arda. Many of the Maiar and Valar spirits, who were powerful angelic beings, had the power to do so. Though interesting enough, there was also a faction of men known as the Beornings who could transform into bears. Where did they get this ability from? What characteristics did they have? And what was their history? Hello friends, it's Carl here, and in today's episode we'll be discussing the Beornings. So the Beornings were named after a man called Beorn. He had quite a gruff appearance, being tall and strong, dark-haired, with bushy eyebrows and a great black beard. He built his home between the forest of Mirkwood and the Misty Mountains on the eastern side of the Great River, and he lived alone with his animals such as horses, dogs and sheep, caring for them as if they were his children. He could also speak to them by making animal noises, and they were so intelligent that they would follow his orders, even complicated ones, such as setting up torches or laying the table. And yet, this wasn't the most curious thing about him, for Beorn had the power to transform into a great black bear. This ability of his was no curse, and any magic involved in it was his own. It's hard to say whether this power was genetic and inherited, or if it was some spell that he knew, cause there are arguments to be made for both sides. We know that for many generations, Beorn's descendants would also have this power, which suggests that this ability was linked to his bloodline, yet Tolkien says that magic was involved. Perhaps an explanation for this could be that Beorn knew some spell, and he taught it to his children, granting them the power to shapeshift into bears also. However, we can't rule out that maybe Beorn wasn't the only man who knew this spell, for after meeting Thorin and company, he disappeared at night, and Gandalf found many bear tracks around his house. For that night, there had been a bear meeting, and many bears of various sizes had gathered there. There were little bears, large bears, ordinary ones, and gigantic bears, and they all danced together outside until dawn approached. These bears had come from every direction except from the Misty Mountains, and it's possible that these bears were men like Beorn, sharing the same ancestry and knowing the magic to shapeshift into a bear. Of course, this is speculation, and they could very well be ordinary bears. However, I don't think we can entirely exclude that they were shapeshifters also. After all, that night of the meeting, we're told that all the bears danced together, and the variation in their shape and size, along with this behavior, would seem quite odd if they were normal bears. Now the Beornings shared a common ancestry with the woodsmen of Mirkwood, the men of Dale, and the men of Rohan. They were descendants from the Edain of the First Age, and they had their own language, though they could also speak the common speech. It seems that sometime early in his life, Beorn used to live in the Misty Mountains, though he was driven out by orcs. For Gandalf once saw him sitting on top of the Carrock at night in bear form, and he heard him growl, "The day will come when they will perish, and I shall go back." And yet, probably due to his powers, some people said that he was descended from the great and ancient bears of the mountains that had lived there in the past, though this is untrue. When Thorin and company first arrived at Beorn's house, Gandalf told him about their adventures, such as the goblins' attack, and how Gandalf slew the Great Goblin. This impressed Beorn, and he grew more sympathetic, possibly because of his hatred towards the orcs that had robbed him of his home. It's interesting to note that he was familiar with the part of the mountain where the goblins ambushed the dwarfs, known as the High Pass, which makes me wonder if perhaps he used to live close to that region when his home was still in the Misty Mountains. Beorn would then offer Thorin and company to rest and have supper at his house, and during the night, after meeting the other bears, he set off towards the Misty Mountains in bear form, where he came across a goblin and a warg that were hunting for the dwarfs. They told him how the Great Goblin had been slain, and how Gandalf had burnt many of the chief servants of the warg leader, though after, instead of letting them go, Beorn killed the goblin and warg, and he stuck the goblin head outside of his gate, and he nailed the warg skin to a tree outside of his house. After this, he was much kinder to the dwarfs, since he had confirmed that their story was true, and he grew to respect them more as a race. Before Thorin and company set off towards Mirkwood, Beorn provided them with many provisions for their journey, such as food that included nuts, pots of honey, and cakes of great sustenance. The recipe behind these cakes was a secret of his, though they contained honey, and even a small bite would provide enough energy for a long march. Beorn also gave them some bows and arrows, and he warned them about the black stream in Mirkwood that was enchanted with a spell of drowsiness and forgetfulness. He also told them to avoid the old forest road, for it had fallen into disuse and goblins would often use it, and that instead they should travel through the elven path. As a final act of kindness, he provided the company with ponies and a horse for Gandalf, though he asked them to send them back once they reached the forest gate. Beorn would then follow them in the distance in bear form as they traveled towards Mirkwood, to guard them, but also to make sure that no harm befell his animals. The quest to reclaim Erebor would prove to be successful, and news would reach Beorn in his wooden hut that Smaug, the great dragon, had been slain. Yet Beorn still had a part to play in the story in the Battle of the Five Armies, where he single-handedly turned the tide of the battle. For even with the eagle's help, the forces of dwarfs, elves and men were still outnumbered, until Beorn appeared, alone and in bear shape, and in his anger he seemed to grow to giant size. His roar was set to sound like drums and guns, and he attacked the goblins from their rear, tossing wolves and goblins away from his spot. He tore through their lines and picked up the body of Thorin, who had been wounded by many spears, and Beorn took him out of the battle. When he returned to the battlefield, his anger was said to have been doubled, and nothing could withstand him, and no weapon could pierce him. He charged towards Bolg, the leader of the goblin forces, scattering and killing his bodyguards, and then he crushed Bolg himself, and the goblin morale crumbled and they fled in terror. It is said that 3/4 of the goblins of the north were slain in this battle, and men could once again travel across the land without fear. Beorn would invite many men to feast at his house, and in the coming years he became a great chieftain in those regions, ruling a wide area of land between the mountains and the forest of Mirkwood. Now as a character, Beorn was very gruff, easily angered and impatient, and he rarely bothered to be very polite. He wore a tunic of wool that reached down to his knees, and he wielded a large axe. He had few friends, and most of them lived far away, and it was rare for him to invite more than a couple of people into his house at one go, for he would usually avoid inviting anyone if he could help it. Yet he seemed to know and respect Radagast, who was one of the 5 wizards, and if you'd like to learn more about him, I'll leave a link to his video above. Now Beorn was very knowledgeable about the lands that surrounded his home, especially the dark forest of Mirkwood. He also didn't like dwarfs much, perhaps because he lived a simple life and cared about nature, which was in sharp contrast to the dwarfs, for they loved gold, silver, and precious stones. In fact, most of the objects in Beorn's house were made of wood, and barely anything apart from his knives were made of metal. Outside of his wooden house, he had some bee pastures, and his bees were larger than hornets, and he harvested their honey and wax. He would use their wax to make candles, while he turned the honey into mead and honey cakes. He was also a strict vegetarian, for he didn't kill or eat animals, and he mainly lived on cream and honey. He could travel extremely fast across great distances while in bear form, and he would sometimes visit the Carrock, a hill of stone found in the middle of the Great River. Here he carved out many steps that led to its peak, and he would sit atop of this hill and stare at the misty mountains, his old home. A cave could be found here, at the bottom of the hill, and perhaps he rested here in bear form, considering its close proximity to the Carrock. Now many of Beorn's descendants were said to be similar to him in character, though perhaps smaller in size and weaker in strength, though a few of them would turn grim and bad. Despite their shape-shifting abilities, they were still men, and they had a regular lifespan, and so by the time of the War of the Ring, Beorn had passed away, and his son, Grim Beorn the Old, was the new chieftain of many men known as the Beornings. These men would help Aragorn enter Mirkwood as he escorted Gollum to the elves, and no orc or warg dared to cross into their land. Through their efforts, the passage known as the High Pass was kept open in the Misty Mountains, which allowed people to travel from Dale to Rivendell, though the Beornings would charge a high price for people to travel through this pass. Just like Beorn, they weren't very fond of dwarfs, and they too were famous for their honey cakes, and for being among the best bakers, though they had grown more reluctant to share their cakes with travelers. Their lands would not escape unharmed in the coming conflict, for during the War of the Ring, they were attacked by the forces of Sauron, and their land set aflame, and it's possible that they helped defend Mirkwood from the attacks of Dol Guldur, for after Dol Guldur's destruction, a part of the forest of Mirkwood, between the Narrows and the mountains of Mirkwood, was given to the Woodsmen and the Beornings. If you'd like to learn more about this attack on Mirkwood and the forest's history, I'll leave a link to a video above. It's interesting to note that some of the Beornings were said to be fair and blonde, unlike Beorn, and we know that in their day, the last goblins of the Misty Mountains were hunted down. Regarding their bear form, I'm not sure if they were entirely in control as bears, or perhaps they might have been more prone to acting on their animalistic nature, such as being aggressive towards strangers. When Thorin and company arrive at the Carrock, Gandalf says that it would be very dangerous for them to wait for Beorn there, and it was a place to which he would often travel to in bear form. And when Beorn held a bear meeting outside of his house, he warned the company not to stray outside until the sun rose, for they would be in danger. Anyway friends, this wraps up today's video, and I hope you enjoyed it. If you're interested, check out our Facebook, Twitter, Patreon, Discord, and Loot Crate links in the video description. And if you enjoyed this video, leave a like, cause it helps this channel immensely, and subscribe to join our fellowship today. I hope to see you all in my next video, where together we'll once again explore the magical world and lore of Middle-earth.